for watching Roundtable. Good to have you along. Russia stands accused of holding Europe hostage over gas supplies. Prices have rocketed, and with winter on the way, there have been warnings that there'll be high prices for some time. Some won't be able to afford the bills. But is Putin or the pandemic to blame? Yes, Russia isn't supplying as much as it used to, with the suggestion that energy is being used here for blackmail. President Putin says Russia definitely isn't doing that. So what will it take to keep Europe warm as the colder months arrive? Good to have you with us. I'm David Foster. Demand fell during the peak of the pandemic. Now it is increasing, and not enough gas has been stored for the better days to come. Where does the blame lie? And what can be done to fix what could be a life or death problem for some? Europe faces a severe fuel shortage in the lead up to winter. Russia accused of using energy as a political weapon amid European gas prices rising substantially. Russian pipelines supply more than a third of the continent's energy needs. A senior Russian diplomat recently said that during 2021, his country increased gas exports to Europe, including through Ukraine, by 15%. There are those analysts who say that Putin is using this crisis to promote the completed Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is completed but yet to pump gas from Russia to Europe. While Germany's been in favour of the pipeline, the USA is against it, saying Europe would be hostage to Russian control of supplies. Russia says the shortage is down to poor European planning, not enough wind to power wind turbines, and the USA cutting supplies. So who is really to blame, and what can be done about it? Let's say hello to Anna Matveyeva from the Norwegian Defence University College, who believes that President Putin has little interest in politicising energy supplies. We welcome back Domitila Sagromoso, Senior Lecturer in the War Studies Department at King's College London, whose expertise covers Russian foreign and security policy. And in Belfast, we say hello to Alexander Titov, Lecturer at Queen's University Belfast, focusing on both Russian foreign policy and contemporary history. I mentioned the fact that you don't think, Anna, that President Putin wants to weaponize energy supplies. We'll come to that in just a moment. But Alexander, I want to ask you first of all, if you were to do that, it would be a very powerful weapon, would it not?
Well, it depends what you want to achieve and in what circumstances. I think you have to kind of look at what people in the Kremlin want in the long term. And in the long term, I think for now, they want a stable source of income from their major asset, which is the gas supplies, and kind of using as a weapon against, for example, its major consumers, such as Germany, would certainly put it in jeopardy. So I would say that other things being equal, they would rather take the money rather than using it as a political weapon.
So is it possible that they misjudged and didn't understand quite how serious it could become on the European continent if they didn't give them the supplies that they wanted, or did just Russia not have them?
Well, if you're talking about the current crisis, I think there is multiple causes of it, and Russia is probably one of the least important in that respect. So far as Russia is concerned, they're still fulfilling the long-term contracts to gas supplies to Europe, but at the same time, they're refraining from perhaps topping it up if that they could have done a bit more, as alleged. But again, there are kind of complicated features, including kind of Russian internal supplies and perhaps other motivations. But the cause of European crisis is not just in Russia. It's a global supply with many factors, including high prices in Asia for LNG, low production of electricity from wind in Europe, low storage and so forth. So kind of focusing on Russia and just blaming Russia for the current crisis, I think is largely misguided.
But that happens to be, we are exploring whether or not that is the case when it comes to Russia. We've done other programs on the issues elsewhere. So thank you for giving us your thoughts on that. Anna, I'll come to you in just a moment, but we'll hear right now from Vladimir Putin.
You are talking about accusations against Russia that it uses energy sources as a weapon. That is complete nonsense and rubbish, politically motivated, non-justified blather. Where do we use the weapon? In which conflicts do we participate? And as for the economy, that is absolutely out of the question. Even in the toughest periods of Cold War Russia, regularly, on a routine basis, fulfilling its contractual obligations, supplied gas to Europe.
He says, Anna, absolutely nothing to do with us. But in a sense, if you look at the amount of gas that Russia has supplied to Europe in the past compared to now, it is way down. Is that simply because there wasn't demand during the pandemic?
That's not quite true. Russia does fulfill its long-term contracts, and yesterday's article in The Economist has confirmed that its continental big clients confirm that they are receiving what they are due. We are talking about whether Russia can increase the capacity and whether they can deliver surplus supplies. That's a big question. Because first, I agree with Alexander, Russia is not the cause of the current energy crisis. It may be a bit of a contributor, but it's a fairly minor one. But from the Russian point of view, Kremlin has pursued a consistent strategy of diversification of its energy markets. The same as Europe did, to be fair. Yeah? So now they have really good clients in Asia, and they have long-term gas contracts, and they are much more stable price-wise because they are linked also to the price of oil. So Russia has alternatives. It also has its own domestic demand. So there are kind of already a lot of constraints they are having. So whether Russia can and should increase the supply, as Norway, for example, has done, that's a question open to negotiation. But I would not say that you open negotiation with a bid that you are using as the energy as a weapon against us. It is a trade-off. Russia has a stake in it. Of course, it's Nord Stream 2. There is a lot of politics around it. From all sides, it has been going on as a transatlantic issue for ages. If that politics was not there, perhaps we would have had Nord Stream on board 2 years ago.
Ready to go, isn't it? It's pretty much there. It just needs the final say-so. So can I, if you've got something more to say on that, I'll gladly listen in just a moment, but I want to bring in Domitila at this point. Does not the fact that Europe is seeing rocketing prices and not enough gas to fulfill the household and business demands that it insists it has to have, does it not show that relying on Russia for so much energy is a dangerous thing?
It is and it isn't, because on the one hand, the supplies have generally been very stable and the prices have not been as high as they are now. So when we had these long-term contracts, they provided stability to the market. Of course, things change because also the European Union was behind the decision to move away from long-term contracts and to rely on the spot market. So that, in a way, can put Europe in vulnerable positions as it is now. To really, I mean, I would. The
spot market meaning that they have to buy it at the inflated prices that we're seeing at the moment.
Exactly. I mean, I think both previous speakers are right in the sense that European Union is a bit at fault here of its own. It's a problem of its own making. But it made sense maybe at a time when the prices of oil were very, very high, and there was a desire to sort of find a way around that. Relying on Russia has advantages and also disadvantages, and the European Union has tried to move away from it. But the problem is that other sources are not entirely readily available, from LNG sources, which are being sent now more to Asia because there is a premium price there, so it's more beneficial, to issues around the supplies of gas in Europe. From Norway or from other providers in the North Sea.
Was there another way, or is there another way forward? Any one of you can answer this one. For Europe to get the gas supplies it needs without having to rely on Nord Stream 2, without having to rely on Russia in this, so that there wouldn't be then those accusations that Russia has a pistol which it can hold to Europe's head.
It could rely on LNG, for example, from the United States, but then it would have to pay a higher price. So the situation is extremely complex. And I think if we talk about the Russian point of view, is that Russia now is in a very strong position. And so it is in a position to be able, in a way, to, I'm not saying dictate terms, but certainly, on the one hand, put pressure so that Nord Stream 2 is certified and moves ahead before January, because January is the date that the Germans are talking about, so that the certification is earlier. Also that there is more gas being piped through the pipeline, because there are limits. There's a 50% agreement that that's the amount of gas that is going to go through the pipeline. And also, on the other hand, Russia and President Putin can maybe just temporalize and wait, because the more we wait, the prices keep going up. So that also plays in its favor. So the situation at the moment for Europe is difficult, because it's very hard to find alternative supplies.
Well, I mean, at the moment, tensions are exacerbated partly because Russia cut off its supply of gas through the Ukraine. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. I know it's more complicated than that, but I would like to read this out, first of all, from Fatih Birol. This is for you, Alexander. Anybody can jump in, but he's head of the International Energy Agency, and it sort of echoes what you were suggesting there, Domitila. If Russia does what it indicated yesterday, that's turning on the taps a little bit more, it increases the volumes to Europe, this would have a calming effect on the market. I don't say that they will do it, but if they wish so, they have the capacity to do it. So, Alexander, why has this not happened adequately yet?
Well, I think there is two aspects to it. First of all, Russia is keen to full its old reserves. I think the projection is that it will finish preparing for winter. Its gas storage for winter will be completed by 1st of November, at which point it will be able to send more gas outside of Russia to Europe, including. The second point, of course, is something that's been alluded earlier, is the issue of Nord Stream 2 gas transit through Ukraine and so forth. So Russia invested a lot of money into building alternative route supplies directly to Germany. And of course, it has interest, both economic and political interest, in making sure that this project is actually operating, despite all the pressure and obstacles being put by its adversaries in the United States and Ukraine and Eastern Europe.
And the situation in Ukraine is causing some tension. I'll ask you to give us your thoughts on that, Alexander, and whether there's a way around it. Anyone at this table can say anything they want at any time. But Alexander first, if that's okay.
Well, I think, if you think about issue with Ukraine, the key aspect, of course, is that Russia has been trying to reduce its reliance on Ukrainian transit for a long time, and it's been investing money in Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, into Turkish Stream, and so forth. And from their point of view, of course, it makes perfect sense, because they don't want to depend on the key exports on a country which has very fraught and antagonistic relations, basically in a state of undeclared war. So far as Russia is concerned, of course, they want to have a direct supplies to its main markets in Western Europe, bypassing Ukraine. Ukraine, on the other hand, wants to have exactly the reverse. First of all, it wants to retain the transit fees from Russian gas, and secondly, it wants to retain this leverage over Russia that it controls its key supply routes. So basically, they have this kind of division of the interest. Where Europe comes in, I'm not sure. I mean, Europe it has to make up its own mind. Does it want to depend in the gas supplies on Russia-Ukrainian relations, which can kind of be broken off and go into war at any moment, or it wants to have a direct supply to Germany from Russia, which is not dependent on any third countries. I mean, there is kind of a issue of geopolitical concerns in terms of support for Ukraine, its independence and its territorial integrity. But at the same time, there is also issue of energy security, which might come in conflict with. So it's a very complex situation, of course. Russia is not stopping its transit of gas from Ukraine completely. It's still, again, fulfilling its obligations, which it has under the 2020 agreement with Ukraine.
It's cut it down considerably, and I'm going to read this out from the Ukrainian authorities. The head of Ukraine's state energy giant Naftogaz. We already see that Gazprom, that's the Russian equivalent, is using gas as a geopolitical weapon, so it's not about the future. We are telling them that Gazprom has been using gas as a geopolitical weapon for years. It's happening at the moment, record prices that really hurt the economy of Ukraine, not just Ukraine, the whole region. Basically, if it is not an economic war, what is that? Does he have a point?
He does not say that Russia does not send gas through Ukraine as it is in the contractual obligations. He complains about prices. Fair enough, nobody wants prices to go up. But Ukraine's problem with Russia is not about gas supplies. Even when political relationship with the Ukrainian leadership was much, much better than it's now, it's really at the lowest point. Still, the issue of gas transit was a very thorny one. The question is not really for Ukraine because it does what it can to rally support for its cause. The issue is for Europe. Would it put support for Ukraine as it has been doing for quite a while first, or would it prioritize its own energy security? We, just to add to the previous discussion, we have not seen a crisis yet. We have an expectation of a crisis if we have a very harsh winter, and then there will be not enough gas ready to go to customers. So if that will happen, whether Russia would come as a rescuer of Europe or not, that depends, of course, on very much political relationship.
But also, it also begs the question, if they could do it then, which you're suggesting they might if they are so inclined, why aren't they doing it now?
It's not that easy to increase supply just like that. Because first, as Alexander said, November is the time when they have to fill their own storage. Russia is a very big country. It also needs to have the pipelines prepared. We don't have Nord Stream 2 because it's not yet certified by German regulator. And Putin says that we cannot expand the Ukrainian route because of the pipeline via Ukraine has not been maintained for 30 years, and it may break and it will be catastrophic.
Well, perhaps he's using that as an excuse. That has also been put forward.
That's something which we would not know unless it's tested.
Okay.
And nobody is prepared to put that scenario to test.
Well, it was used before that. But, Anna, thank you. I'll come to you back in a moment, but I don't want to leave you on the sidelines, because I then threw to Alexander when you were just about to say something about Ukraine. In response to my suggestion that they've cut off supplies through Ukraine, you said it's not that simple. Do you want to fill in on that, or do you think we've heard enough about that already? Do you want to move somewhere else?
I just want to add, I think it was explained very clearly that, that Russia is providing the supply through Ukraine as agreed, this 40 BCM a year, as was agreed in 2009. So in that respect, we are making sure in Europe that there is a certain amount of gas that transits through Ukraine at the moment. The problem for Ukraine is that also there was an agreement signed between Russia and Hungary, and the transit of that gas is no longer via Ukraine, but via, I think it is via Turkey and then Austria, all the way to Hungary. So that also has an impact on the reverse supplies that Ukraine receives from Europe. So at the moment, Ukraine is also receiving, Russian reverse gas through European countries. So any other agreement that is signed between Russia and European countries can have an impact on the supply of gas to Ukraine. So I think this is also important to highlight. It's not only a transit question, it's also where does Ukraine find its supplies and how much will it pay?
Where will, as Anna suggested, Europe decide to jump? If it's a question of deciding it's either the Russians or it's Ukrainians, and I know it's never that simple, but which way will Europe go? Do you think it's much more likely that they will actually sort of try to appease Ukraine and sort of take what they need because it's absolutely vital from Russia?
I think that if put against the wall, I think we are getting close to a situation where it's very serious now. I think that Europeans are going to really try to make a deal with Russia and reach an agreement on probably long-term contracts. I think we can see a return maybe on a more stable relationship, and it reminds me a bit of what happened during the 1970s with the oil crisis. where there was in the end an agreement to reach some kind of stable relationship and a mechanism that can guarantee that there are not these spikes. I think these price spikes have shown that it's very risky to leave entirely, the energy market or the energy prices to the market, especially at a situation where we are now trying to come out of this very strong recession as a result of COVID. So
it seems to me that a fundamental mistake or miscalculation was made. Nobody really thought that the prices were going to go up as high as they could. But what sensible people do in that situation is they hedge. They hedge their bets and make sure that if it does go the other way, they're actually covered in that regard. And I know you want to say something, but I don't want to leave Alexander on his own all of this time. Do you want to add something at this moment?
The key here is, as was said, safety of supplies and also safety of demand. And I think that's why Russia is pushing for the long-term contracts, because it is dependent on the income from those contracts for its own budget and so forth. So yeah, there is this big issue. I think, of course, the long-term. I don't know if it's we have time to cover that, but there is also
about
issue
4 minutes
of transition
left.
to alternative energy as well, which will impact Russia's energy sector considerably in the coming years, and I think that's is the big issue which will change the balance of energy security in Europe in the next decade.
It's written down in my book for a future program, though not that far into the future. Alexander, quick thoughts, because I say we've only got about 3.5 minutes to go. Has Putin been unfairly accused of weaponizing this situation?
I think to an extent, yes. I think it's been exaggerated and in many ways, in an unhelpful way, the whole security crisis, the excessive focus on Russia when there are other factors involved in the current crisis. But at the same time, it brings to attention the issue of Europe-Russia relations and the energy players in it. And I think it needs another, careful examination by both policymakers in both Russia and in Brussels.
But Russia has probably... Yes, carry on then. I've got a quick one.
I think that Russia and Putin missed an opportunity to really come immediately to the help to Europe and in a way mend bridges, which is what we really need now. We all understand that Russia has very good arguments in favor of very tough negotiations, but at this moment, it would have been very helpful if Russia would have come much more quickly and assertively in favor of helping the European Union, and that would have created a very strong sort of positive attitude towards Russia, and it wouldn't have given a strong argument to those who are constantly arguing that Russia is sort of manipulating and using energy as a weapon.
Too late for Russia to do that now?
I think that a lot of damage has been done, and those who are very negative about Russia's behavior, we're going to use this again, as an argument, and that's really, for me, the side of this.
I agree with Demitila, but I think we cannot take the politics out of it. Because from the point of view of the Kremlin, whether they're right or wrong, that's another matter. They felt that unilateral concessions to the West have never paid off on different foreign policy fronts. So they now want a favor for favor. Yeah. Yes, we have something which you want. We also want to see you coming our way. Because they do not believe that generally buying goodwill, as the first decade of independent Russia under Yeltsin, and to some extent early Putin and early Medvedev were doing, that works in their favor. They do not think that it brought them any benefits, so now it is, from their point of view, is a zero-sum game, and they are not going to change. Europe has alternatives to Russian gas supply, but they are less cost-effective and they're long-term. So in that sense, yes, the countries which argue Ukrainian case are the ones who are the least reliant on Russian energy. That's United States and United Kingdom. Less than 1% of UK supplies come from Russia. So they're proponents of Ukrainian cause. Those who have more kind of energy requirements coming from Russia, they have been a bit, and I think would be more pragmatic.
Well, that's extraordinary, really, isn't it? I mean, it goes back to, what, 1989, Alexander? You think this festering wound?
'89, with collapse of the Soviet Empire.
Yeah.
To an extent, yes. I think kind of this mistrust of Russia, of course, has long roots, and we've seen kind of broad estrangement between Russia and Western Europe and the United States going for the last sort of 15, years, if not longer. But I think if I am kind of making one final point, the only reason why Europe buys Russian gas is because it's cheap, it's plentiful, and it's readily available.
Which it hasn't been at the moment, which is why we're sitting around this table talking about it.
It has. I mean, the long-term contract has been fulfilled. I mean, the extra contracts is another matter.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much indeed. As you said, it had to be a last point because time is always our biggest enemy on this program, but it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you very, very much indeed. And we appreciate you sitting down, standing up, whatever you happen to be doing while you're watching this program of Roundtable, for at least taking the time to take it in. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, we hope to see you next time. Till then.